Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into possible 2016 Russian collusion and, of course, Russian meddling enters a new stage. President Trump is asserting that he's already in the clear. He tweeted Friday, quote, "It is now commonly agreed after many months of costly looking that there was no collusion between Russia and Trump. Was collusion with Hillary Clinton." That assertion, of course, is not, quote, commonly agreed. The matter is still being investigated. And the investigation, we should note, is not just about, quote, Russia and Trump. It's about Russia and the Trump team. And joining me now is one of President Trump's most enthusiastic supporters, the Republican governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie. Governor Christie, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jake.
So CNN broke the news this weekend that Bob Mueller's grand jury has approved its first charges. As a former U.S. attorney, do you think President Trump's associates should be worried about what might be about to unfold?
Well, listen, I think anybody who's been advised by the special counsel's office that they're a target of the investigation, which I'm sure he has done to those people who are, should be concerned. And I'll tell you what else we should be concerned about. You know, the fact that CNN has this information, as you know, Jake, there are very, very strict laws on grand jury secrecy. And so depending upon who leaked this to CNN, that's a criminal violation potentially. So, you know, I think for us to have confidence in this process, we got to make sure that the grand jury process remains confidential, remains secret, so that the special counsel can work effectively to be able to get to the bottom of all that he's looking into. I think the good news from the president's perspective is he's not under investigation. And the fact is that if something comes up this week, as CNN's reported, then we'll move from there on the legal process.
How do you know that the president's not under investigation? There is, of course, still the charge that Mueller might be looking into of potential obstruction of justice when President Trump fired James Comey.
Well, the last news that we've received, Jake, publicly, is that the president was told he's not under investigation. We've heard nothing to the contrary. So I'm making that statement off of the public information that we've already been given.
One of the things we learned this week about the investigation into possible collusion, which remains yet unproven, is that President Trump's campaign data firm, Cambridge Analytica, reached out to WikiLeaks during the election to try to get access to Hillary Clinton's emails. Julian Assange of WikiLeaks says that he rejected that request. But does that concern you, that Cambridge Analytica, which worked for the Trump campaign, made that request?
Well, listen, I think at that point, those materials were ready to be made public. Were going to be put on the internet. WikiLeaks have been saying that they were going to do that for quite some time. But, you know, listen, Jake, this is pulling away a veil on both sides, on the Clinton campaign and other campaigns as well, about the way some of politics is done today, which is not very tasteful. And I think it should concern everybody that people are getting involved in that type of activity. And we've seen it as not only from both main campaigns, but we obviously saw it that was going on in the Republican primary as well. So it's something that we should all be concerned about. I don't think it implicates anything legally, but I do think it's something that we should all be concerned about in terms of the way campaigns are run right now.
Some of President Trump's allies in the media and on Capitol Hill are calling on Bob Mueller to step down as special counsel. I'm not really sure where you stand on this issue. Have you seen any concrete evidence or concrete reason why Bob Mueller should step down?
Well, listen, I think that he has to be very, very careful about making sure that the public believes that he has no conflicts and that his integrity is unquestioned. And I think that, you know, Director Mueller has to continue to review that with his own legal staff. And I have not yet seen anything that makes me think he must step down, that there's an absolutely indisputable conflict. But I think he's got to be careful and be watching this all the time. He's been around law enforcement for a long time. I dealt with him when I was U.S. Attorney. He was Director of the FBI. He's got a lot of knowledge and been involved with a lot of folks over that period of time. So I think it's incumbent upon him to hold himself to the highest possible standards so that people in this country can have absolute confidence in whatever conclusions he comes to in this investigation.
I guess one of the things going on is, and you know this as a former U.S. attorney who worked with both James Comey and Robert Mueller, and I've only heard you say nice things about both men, publicly and privately, is that there is this effort by President Trump and his team and his allies in the media to do everything they can to destroy the Comey and Mueller their public reputations. And I wonder if, as a former prosecutor, as somebody who has said nice things about both men, if that bothers you.
Well, a few things I'll say. First off, when you're in law enforcement and you're investigating folks, you are going to have bad things said about you. You have to get used to it. And the way you deal with it is to follow the facts wherever they lead, and then let those facts draw you to whatever legal conclusions. Not have legal conclusions that you're looking for facts to support. So that's very important, and that's the way you push back against any type of public criticisms. Now listen, I don't think I've seen things from the White House that is trying to impugn Director Mueller in these recent weeks. But what I will say is that, you know, Director Comey, who I like and I respect, but I also know that a lot of what happened during the Hillary Clinton investigation, including his announcement of no charges against Hillary Clinton, putting aside the substance, Jake, that is unprecedented for an FBI person, whether it's the director or special agent in charge of a local office, to make that type of announcement. Those are the prosecutor's decisions.
Today you're marking the 5-year anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, which hit New Jersey. 70% of the people of Puerto Rico, after the hurricanes they suffered, are still living without power. What lessons did you learn from Sandy that Puerto Rico might be able to learn from?
Well, the good news is I've been talking regularly to Governor Rosillo in Puerto Rico to relay some of those things to him, and to Tom Bossert, the Homeland Security Advisor at the White House, who's kind of quarterbacking this from their perspective, to share those lessons. But what I would tell you is that restoring power is the single most important thing you can do, along with rebuilding roads. Those two things are the most important things you can do to restore normalcy. The problem in Puerto Rico has been that that infrastructure was so badly degraded prior to the storm because of the island's problems financially and the bankruptcy that they've been going through, that when that storm came through, the destruction made it even worse. I've heard we've sent more folks, Jake, down to Puerto Rico than any other state. Over 1,100 National Guards people and state police. And as they've begun to cycle back, what I've heard from them is that the problem in getting supplies around the country, around the territory rather, and making sure that people are getting helped is that the roads are destroyed everywhere outside of San Juan, and that now they're having to rebuild those. Now you can airlift, and they're doing those things, but those are the big problems that I see right now, and we're going to have to get very, very aggressive. I think the administration has been aggressive in terms of getting the supplies there. Now we're going to have to start rebuilding those roads and that infrastructure for them so that people can return to normalcy. That's a different job than what we had in Sandy, because our infrastructure was in much better shape, but it is significant and serious.
All right, Governor Chris Christie, New Jersey, thanks so much for joining us.
Jake, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
As soon as tomorrow, the first person might be taken into custody as part of Robert Mueller's investigation. But while that investigation moves into this new phase, Republicans on Capitol Hill seem eager to get their congressional investigations over with. Richard Burr, the leading member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, says he expects his investigation to finish by early next year. And the Republican in charge of the House committee says he has no interest in prolonging the investigation, quote, 1 second longer than necessary. Here to discuss is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Angus King. He's an independent senator of Maine who caucuses with the Democrat. Senator, good to see you as always. So the first charges have been filed in the Mueller investigation. The charges are still sealed under orders from a federal judge. As someone who sits on the Intelligence Committee who knows this case well, I wanted to get your sense about which Trump associates you might be watching over the next couple days, who might find themselves in legal jeopardy.
Well, I can't really speculate. I don't know any more than you or your prior guests about what those indictments are going to look like, who they're going to be, how many they're going to be. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I think it's important, Jake, to distinguish between what we're doing on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Director Mueller's investigation. Director Mueller is looking at criminal violations. That's his job. He's a federal prosecutor. In our case, we're looking at the facts. What did the Russians do? How did they do it? How did we prevent it next time? And also, was there some relationship between the Russians and the Trump campaign? They're different kind of investigation. So we're on parallel tracks, but not the same track. So, like everyone else in Washington, I'll be watching tomorrow to see what comes out of the Mueller investigation. But I think it's important to emphasize that this, whatever it is really just the beginning, and I'm sure there will be additional evidence, assuming Director Mueller uncovers additional evidence. He's a pro. He's going to follow the facts where they lead.
Well, you mentioned the investigation by your committee into whether or not there was any collusion between members of the Trump team and any agents of the Russian government. Have you found any evidence that there was?
Well, that's another question I'm not going to answer because we're in the middle of the investigation. I can tell you that our staff and our members have interviewed something like 100 witnesses, hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. We're still in the middle of that, and so I'm not going to comment on where we are. What we're not in the middle of, and I think what's really being sort of lost, Jake, in all the noise about was there collusion and Mueller and all that, the Russians egregiously meddled in our democracy in 2016, and they're still doing it, and they're going to do it again, and they're set up in Spain now, and they're setting up in Scotland. They have discovered a way to turn the strengths of our country and the West against ourselves. I call it geopolitical jujitsu, where they're taking advantage of our free press and our open society and driving divisions. And there's no question that they did that in 2016 in a big way. And we're going to talk about that this week at the committee with Facebook and Twitter. And this is a really serious problem. And all the excitement about the collusion issue, which is really important, has obscured what I believe is the larger issue, which is that our country was, is, and will be under attack.
President Trump is working hard to discredit all the investigations, House, Senate, and Mueller. On Friday, he tweeted, quote, "It's now commonly agreed after many months of costly looking that there was no collusion between Russia and Trump, was collusion with Hillary Clinton." So is that accurate, that it's widely agreed, commonly agreed that there was no collusion?
No, I don't think so. It's certainly not commonly agreed in our committee, and we're the ones that are doing the investigation. I don't think there's any basis for that statement. We may end up, it's entirely possible we'll end up at the investigation at the end finding that there wasn't. But the contrary could also be true. Right now, as Chairman Burr said, we're not talking about winding up for some 6 months. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of leads to be followed, a lot of witnesses to be interviewed, and it's way premature to say that some kind of conclusion has been reached.
Some Republican lawmakers are suggesting that Bob Mueller should step down, that he has a conflict of interest. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree exactly with Governor Christie, who you spoke to just a few minutes ago, who said, number one, Bob Mueller is a guy of impeccable reputation. He's a professional prosecutor, 30 years in law enforcement, and he'll be the one that decides if there is some kind of conflict. I haven't seen it. He's, like I say, when he was appointed, everyone from Newt Gingrich all across the spectrum said, oh, this is a brilliant appointment. He'll follow the facts where they lead. And that's exactly what he's doing, is keeping his head down and assembled a strong team, and he's going to follow. And it's really important, Jake, because the public ultimately has to have confidence in the result, both of what he's doing and what we're doing. And that means you've got to turn over the leads. You've got to go to the end and say either something happened or something didn't happen, and that's got to have credibility. I don't see any reason why he should recuse himself or be fired or anything else. The fact that these charges are suddenly coming in a kind of crescendo at the very time it appears there are also indictments to be forthcoming, there is a kind of coincidence there that I don't think you can miss.
Senator, stick around. We have a lot more to talk about, including one prominent Republican who says Democrats are going to try to impeach President Trump if they win the House majority in 2008. Is that part of the Democratic plan? Stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Union. We're joined again by Senator Angus King, independent senator of Maine. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, the White House and its allies on Capitol Hill and in the media have been eager to refocus attention from the Mueller probe and the Senate and House Intelligence Committee probes to instead talk about questions about the actions of Bill and Hillary Clinton. One of the issues is the Obama administration approval in 2010 of the sale of a majority stake in a Canadian uranium mining company to a Russian company. Take a listen to what President Trump had to say about this week.
I think the uranium sale to Russia and the way it was done, so underhanded, with tremendous amounts of money being passed, I actually think that's Watergate modern age.
Senator King, what's your response, and do you think Congress should investigate the deal or the FBI informant whose lawyer says he has information about Russian efforts to influence the Clintons to win support for the deal?
Well, I think the House, one of the House committees has already begun an oversight committee hearing. I always think oversight hearings are appropriate. I've been trying to understand this deal. I think the important thing that I learned in reading the background is the company changed hands, but the uranium that's mined in the United States cannot leave the United States. So it wasn't really the sale of uranium; it was the sale of a mining and manufacturing company. But there are questions about it, and I think you know, we need to get to the bottom of them. I don't think that there's you have to try to find out the facts if there are questions raised, and I think, as I say, the House has already got something underway on that question. Hopefully we can get it resolved and keep moving forward.
We also learned this week that a lawyer for the Clinton campaign and the DNC at least partially funded that opposition research dossier into then candidate Trump. John Podesta and Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the head of the DNC at the time, they both say they had no idea that they were funding the dossier looking into President Trump's connections to Russia. Do you believe them?
Well, what I've been hearing for months, and not just in the last few days, is that this thing was originally opposition research begun by Republicans during the primary period, and I think that's been confirmed in the last few days. And then after the primaries were over, in effect, the opposition research was turned over to the Democrats. And, you know, I don't know who funded it or how it was funded, but it wasn't a surprise to me, because that was what I understood had happened. And as Governor Christie said, unfortunately, in this day and age, opposition research is part of the political process, and it goes on, you know, all the time amongst both parties. And in fact, in this case, it was an opposition research product that was partially funded by the Republicans at the beginning, and then at the end was funded by the Democrats.
Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown is urging his fellow Democrats to work with President Trump on a plan to cut taxes for working families. You're on the Senate Budget Committee. Where do you come down on the issue? Do you think a deal is possible with President Trump on the tax issue?
Well, I think a deal is possible. One of the odd things about the process that we're undertaking now is it's just like health care. It's all being done entirely behind closed doors by Republicans, only by Republicans. I can tell you, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, but I do meet with the Democrats. And there's a majority of the Democratic caucus that wants to do tax cuts. It's just a question of how are they funded, how are they directed, who will get the benefits. So I think there is a deal there. And hopefully that's the direction we'll go in, instead of trying to jam down some massive unfunded tax cut that will only add to our kids' deficits.
Your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, said on Friday that if the Republican Party doesn't pass tax reform, Democrats will win back the House, and then they will attempt to impeach President Trump. Take a listen.
Well, I think all of us realize that if we fail on taxes, that's the end of the Republican Party's governing majority in 2018. I can't imagine how he could be successful with Nancy Pelosi running the House. They'd try to impeach him pretty quick.
Is Senator Graham right about this?
Again, I'm not a Democrat. I haven't heard any talk to that effect. I don't know what I don't know where that goes. I think President Trump is transactional. He likes to do deals. I mean, that's his whole career. And again, on taxes, I think there's a deal there to be had. It may not be massive and the biggest in history, but I wish we could skip this jam down phase and move to the bipartisan discussion phase. And I think we could get something done, and he could claim success.
Senator Angus King, independent of Maine, thank you so much for your time. Always good to see you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jake.